Members of the House, the 1990s boom showed that peace is better than war. The Gulf War of 1991 demonstrated that wars can be bad for the economy, they can be bad for society, and for the general unification of the world in terms of peacekeeping. We think that the reason why there were so many peacekeeping organizations that were created is because the international community realized the true catastrophic detriment of war, and it's because of that catastrophic detriment that we stand to propose the motion that this House believes that war causes more harm than good. Right, now in terms of our definition, we think that the motion is quite self-explanatory. But we think that the harms are that this debate should be based on whether the harms are so great that they trump consideration over the so-called benefits of war, especially in the long run. And that's essentially what we think is our burden too in this debate. We'll be proving this to you based on three issues, right? Firstly, political issues, how the international community is affected, the domestic and regional influence that they have in terms of security. Secondly, morals and how the ends don't justify the means. And thirdly, we look at the economic situations that the countries that are engaged in war or often affected by war are actually affected by it, right? Now, moving into our first point, which is that of international perception, right? We look at how international perception affects international bodies like the ICC, like the UN, right? We think that with war, ladies and gentlemen, or with the culture, with war that is existent within the world, that the perception of war that countries generally have for it is changed, that the moral capacity of these countries are changed. No, thank you, not at this time, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that that corrupts our moral fiber or our moral reaction to war, right, or international conflicts. We think that that goes against, that kind of creates a culture of war and goes against the fact that we have to uphold peace and human rights within the world, right? Now, we think that that's bad because it threatens security, not only the security of the countries that are engaged in the war, but the security of the countries around it. We see how this causes a ripple effect, right? We think that the harms of war, ladies and gentlemen, are not exclusive to the countries that are actually engaged in war. We think that those harms actually reach into the countries surrounding those countries, right, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that we see this culture of moving away from peacekeeping, right, as an extremely negative thing. And I think that more emphasis should be put on creating peace. More emphasis should be put on diplomacy, right? Now, ladies and gentlemen, we think that war yields more harms, right? But also, we see how the countries that have been in wars and are still facing the repercussions thereof are facing a stigma, right? I think that perception changes reality. I think that that stigma, ladies and gentlemen, actually affects how that country is viewed by other countries, how that country's interests are protected, right? Now, we think, we think that outweighs war and the harms, ladies and gentlemen. And now we look at fascism and the countries that that affected by war. Yes, sir.
Don't you think that war has become the last resort and it is used only when other measures failed before?
No, sir. We see, actually, yes, we think that that's what happens, but far too often do we see that those other methods that they're advocating for fail, ladies and gentlemen. And thus we see how war actually is perpetuated or propagated within the countries that have tried diplomacy and countries that have tried such things, right? Now, moving back into my point, which is that of fascism, right? Now, we think that, ladies and gentlemen, the countries that advocate for war, because the perspective of, because the perspective of war has been changed, right? That the countries use people within those countries like as means to an end, right? That those people only have the rights that they have if they benefit the state, right? Ladies and gentlemen, we think that they're there as an end. Because what the country tries to do with them is that they try to advance the ideology of the state. They propagate what this state wants. And essentially, which goes back to what we're trying to prove to you, the culture of peace is corrupted, right? Because it perpetuates a culture of war. Now we look at cooperative security, right? and how we agreed on signing, how we subscribe to ideas, to organizations such as the UN, right? How we agree, and by doing that, how we agree not to go to war, right? Because we're protecting our own interests, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that with the formation, or rather with the Declaration of Human Rights, that we don't see this being upheld within wars. We see how human rights violations affect civilians themselves, ladies and gentlemen, but also how the soldiers that are involved in wars are killed. And we think that we're protecting by our interests by subscribing into these organizations and by engaging in war and having a culture of war. We think that the fundamental purpose of those organizations is undermined, and that's why we propose that we should put more emphasis on diplomacy and peacekeeping, right? No, thank you, sir. But because of all of this, you see how political instability is created, right? We think that bad international relations, ladies and gentlemen, are directly actually are a result of no, thank you. Yeah. So we then look at how the economy of these countries are affected, right? Now we look at America, and I think that it's ironic that America has a huge military spending, and that's the reason why it's an empire today. But at the same time, the huge military spending is what's bankrupting them, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that that's thus destroying their status as an empire, because they're spending all this money on unnecessary wars. And I think that that money that they're spending unnecessarily is adding up, right? We think that the US is adding trillions of dollars to its debt burden by financing multiple wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen, and so forth, right, ladies and gentlemen? And we'd like to tell you that war actually kind of always causes recession. Well, we think that if it's a very short war, of course there are bound to be some benefits from it, and the economy is about to be stimulated in the short run. But if the war is not quick and it drags on, which is 90% of the time, we think, ladies and gentlemen, then wars put the nation waging war into recession, and it hurts the economy, right? You see how America's massive military spending on unnecessary and unpopular wars lowers economic growth and increases unemployment, right? You see how they pump money into defending themselves, how defense spending actually means that the government is pulling away resources from other departments, right? As such, ladies and gentlemen, and other parts of the market, rather, and instead of using them, and instead use them to buy weapons and supplies to pay for soldiers. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that the culture of war is an extremely negative thing, and that's why we're very proud to propose this motion.
We thank the gentleman for his speech, and we'd like to call up the first member of Team Opposition.
Yes, no, second.
Yeah, no worries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, let's look at what burdens each team have. Because today we're not going to talk about the World War II, which is the worst war ever, and we're not going to talk about the 8 Seconds War in the Sandwich Islands. Today we're going to talk about general wars, not about the culture of war that perpetrates itself, but about a general situation and how that general situation impacts us. Now, what we want to show you today is that over 85% of wars nowadays are civil wars. They're not wars country against country. They're one part inside the country that attacks the rest. We consider that this is important, and this is one big point that Team Proposition must tackle. They must show us how the state should not intervene to protect its own citizens. Because the domestic analogy is simple. If somebody attacks me and tries to kill me, I may have the right of self-defense. That's exactly what countries may do. That's what means self-defense at a national level. In the moment in which someone internal or external attack you, that's the moment in which you do not only have the right, but you have the duty to protect your citizen. You must intervene because your people might die. Of course that some people will die if you intervene, but the duty of the state is to protect the majority of the citizen. And in the moment in which you are attacked, that's the moment in which you really fulfill your duty as a state. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to structure my speech in 3 big points. I'm going to start with our constructive matter about the evolution of war, secondly, about diplomacy, thirdly, about the effects of war, and my colleague will further on develop analyzing the wars that exist in the present day. Let's start with the evolution of war. What we understand today is that people really understood how bad wars are after World War II, after the Cold War. People really understood that war is not so fine. Now let's look, why did the people understand this? Because of globalization, firstly. Because as Team Proposition stated, if a war is created, it might escalate. If a local country might become bigger. But what we say is that this is a disincentive. This makes countries do not start a war when they want, because every war that they start might affect their friends, might affect the society as a whole. Yes, please.
And those are the harms that essentially we're talking about in today's debate.
Exactly, and these harms do not exist because wars are not started so easily. Wars are started only when they're necessary, because people are afraid to start them in this way. Secondly, we consider that wars have evolved because of the nuclear proliferation. We think that the majority of the countries have nuclear weapons or have friends with nuclear weapons. What does this mean? This means that when I want to attack a country, I may not attack it because I am afraid of nuclear weapons. This is another big disincentive, and this is why country versus country wars do not exist in the modern society, because countries are afraid to attack each other. What will happen with North Korea? What will happen with Iran? No, thank you. This is why we do not attack each other. And thirdly, all the countries are dependent on each other at an economical level. We say that every country is interconnected with the other because they're part of different economical relations or organizations. We believe that because of these organizations exist, I may not attack you because by destroying your economy, my economy will be further destroyed. We believe that's the third disincentive for countries to not attack other countries. So what do we have at the end of the day at this point? The fact that wars do not just start as they did in the past because countries are afraid to start wars. They have many things to lose. Now, let's look at when wars do start. As I've stated before, wars start in the moment in which the state has to fulfill its role of protection. This happens when diplomacy fails. Because sometimes diplomacy fails. What do we mean is that every time we start something, we firstly start by imposing economical sanctions, by stigmatizing this country at an international level. We believe that this is problematic per se, because economical pressures destroy the very basic human. Destroy a regular Joe. In the moment in which you do not give money to that country, every people in that country has problems. We believe that even if we give these economical sanctions, these are not beneficial, and sometimes they do not work. Do you contradict it?
Do you not believe that in the DRC, the M23 neglected to go through a process of negotiation, went in guns blazing, Rambo action, and then decided to negotiate? That's what we're talking about, the culture of war.
Now, what we stated in my first point is that there are wars that were totally bad and there were wars short that were totally good. That's what you said, that there are wars that on the short run are beneficial. We're not talking about extremes today, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about the normal war, which has benefits and has disadvantages. And today the role of our team is to show you that the benefits overwhelm the disadvantages. It's simple. Going back with diplomacy. Also, no thank you. We see that the stigmatization does not always work, and this is the case of human rights. When human rights are infringed, there are dictators or authoritarian regimes that do not care that at an international level you tell them they're not okay. They do not care, and the people suffer. The majority of the countries that participated in the Arab Spring pledged for USA and other countries to intervene. They wanted interventions. They wanted war with that dictator because they knew that without that war, their life will not be so good. They knew that they will suffer. They knew things like this, and they understood that sometimes war is necessary when diplomacy fails. Because in all the examples in the Arab Spring, diplomatical measures were tried, but they failed. Team Proposition must tell us what happens when diplomacy fails and people still suffer, must tell us what do we do at that point. That's part of their burden. Now, leading to the last point about the effects of the war. Firstly, they told us that people die. We respond by saying with our first point, the fact that the wars evolve, the fact that yes, sometimes people die, but there are lesser wars, so it's not a large amount of people. Secondly, sometimes like in Afghanistan or other countries, before the war, more people died than in the war or after the war. So we believe that sometimes war makes less people die. Thirdly, it is the duty of the state to protect it. As I stated, the majority of the wars are civil wars. You cannot just stand and see how all your people die. You must choose to sacrifice some people for the good of the majority. That's how a state works. The show must go on. Now, they also stated the example of the soldiers. The soldiers choose to go to war. Nobody tells them, you kid, you will become a soldier. No, soldiers choose to become soldiers, and this is why we believe they're not the good example of what happens, because they choose their job. Secondly, about the economy, we believe that in the modern society, after a country destroys somehow another country in a war, they make that country better. Even after the World War II, Hiroshima now is better than every other city was before the USA in World War II. All the countries that were participating in Arab Spring are now held by the international community. The economy of countries like Mali or Rwanda or other things like is better because, or Chile, Mexico, is extremely benefit from the fact that there were some interventions of the Americans. And lastly, we say that in the final, war brings peace, because there's a treaty, and because of the interconnection, countries are afraid to start another war when they sign the treaty. That's why, even if it is forced, peace is kept by wars. And this is why, at the end of the day, we believe that Team Proposition has not assumed this burden. They should respond as what happens when diplomacy fails, what's the duty of the state to protect its citizens, and for all these reasons, I beg you to oppose.
Okay, we'd like to call up the second speaker of Team Proposition.
Mr. Speaker, they make it a wasteland and call it peace. The ability of side opposition to dress rainbow like Nelson Mandela is quite appalling in today's debate, Mr. Speaker. We think they hide their model and the benefits of their model through catastrophic detriments and a veil of words. I'm here to break that veil of words. Onto that, we'll get into what this debate was about. And I'll have 2 points of contention in today's debate. First, I'll ask, are there really methods pursued, right? And then second, I'll ask, does the war make things better, okay? That's like the most fundamental things that we got from first speaker of opposition. But first, let's clarify a couple of things, okay? But we'd like to say that they didn't fulfill their mandate. They didn't tell you how war is good, okay, and why war is good. They didn't tell you. All they did tell you, however, is that wars won't happen. We think that's not their mandate in today's debate. They need to prove to you that war is indeed good, okay? And my first speaker has proven that to you, and they failed to break down his speech, okay? He then gives us a burden. He then gives us a burden that we need to prove that other measures work in today's debate. We don't need to prove that, Mr. Speaker. All we need to prove is that war is more harmful than it is good, okay? That's the debate in today's debate. We think that's important. No, please sit down now. Okay. He tells you that wars won't happen, and I've already shown you why that's irrelevant in today's debate. He then sets a criteria, right, as opposition as to what we should debate in today's debate. We think that's not their mandate, that's not their burden. That was the burden of my first speaker's brilliant speech, right? And he's already fulfilled his burden that they failed to break down in today's debate. But let's just entertain side opposition in today's debate, okay? Okay, let's first start with, does other methods really pursued, okay? So we get this idea that the methods are really pursued. We would say no, okay? We would say the culture in international community now is to jump straight into war, okay? I've shown you the example in my POI about the DRC and the M23 in the DRC, okay, about how they went straight into wars, okay, because they needed to achieve what they wanted to achieve. We say that diplomatic processes, although we don't need to prove it, that war is like the culture in international community is that of we jump straight into war. We think that's harmful, okay, Mr. Speaker. But even if we were to take their burden and say that we need to prove some sort of state where other measures have worked, would give you a case study of Liberia, Egypt, and Algeria. Okay, like Liberia and Egypt were about to have a fallout. Then Algeria, I think Algeria negotiated that process in 2008. We think that's very beneficial in today's debate. Even though that's not our mandate, we'll beat them on that terms as well, Mr. Speaker. Okay, so I've already shown you how they didn't fulfill their burden and therefore they can't win this debate anyway, okay? Then they go on to, then there's my second point of contention of whether or not does war make things better. We would say no, okay? Name one example where war made things better, okay? In the long run, Mr. Speaker, we think Hiroshima is still radioactive, which means that that war didn't make it good, Mr. Speaker. We think Libya now, after NATO, right, Mr. Speaker, because they'd like to define like civil disobedience and civil wars, okay? It's still not okay. Their economy is in shambles. Their infrastructure is in shambles. Mr. Speaker, people are dead in Libya. They need to prove to us why and how that makes war better. No, please sit down, ma'am. Okay, let's move on to my substantive matter in today's debate and show you why actually we deserve to win this debate. And I'll have two elements in my substantive matter. First, I'll evaluate the international relations within society, and then I'll actually look at how war is actually war and will forever be war. Okay, Mr. Speaker. So let's begin, okay? Now we ask the question that does war hurt international relations? We would say yes. We would say that war breaks unification amongst countries, okay? That the perception created that another country or another human is inferior to you, right, Mr. Speaker, because you want an ulterior motive, ulterior agenda, okay, Mr. Speaker. We give you the case study of Afghanistan and America, okay? The Afghanistan people in America are marginalized because the Arab people in America are marginalized because they're Arab. You know why, Mr. Speaker? Because the American dream means that you have to come together as a collective and all hate on Afghanistan, Mr. Speaker. We think war perpetuates such a perception. We say that this perception is very harmful in terms of a progressive society, a progressive international community which aims at peace, Mr. Speaker. We would say war doesn't we would say war doesn't fulfill that mandate. It makes things worse. Yes, sir.
What do you say about national self-defense when someone attacks your country and your role as a state is to protect your citizen?
Okay, like it's amazing how he brings that up in the POI, but in the same breath in his speech, he tells you that no state will actually go to war with each other, okay, because of some mutually assured destruction like doctrine, okay. We don't think that contradiction stands in today's debate. We think they need to clear up that mess, and if they have anything to do with today's debate, the second speaker needs to do something about it, okay. So we ask the question, why actually is this important? We'd say that war's aim is peace, like the first speaker said. We would say that war doesn't achieve peace, right, Mr. Speaker, because war creates barriers amongst countries. So you cannot ever achieve peace when there are barriers within countries, right, Mr. Speaker. You need a collective agreement, and war breaks that collective agreement because you're automatically prioritizing the interest of one nation over the interest of another nation. We would say that's overall detrimental, Mr. Speaker, and they need to prove to us how this will ever achieve peace, because I've already shown you that it will never, ever, ever achieve peace in today's debate, and they need to prove to us in their second speaker speech. No, please sit down, okay? We would say again that war preaches immorality, and we'd say it says that human life is not valuable, Mr. Speaker. It harms human rights progressivism. We think that's important in today's debate because it's war. That's the justification, okay? Women get raped, Mr. Speaker, in war, and the justification is that it's just war, right, Mr. Speaker? Kids get blown up in war, and their justification is it's just war. We don't think that that's actually fair in today's debate. They need to prove to us why all those detriments are less than their benefits, right, Mr. Speaker? We would say that's a big burden that they need to prove in today's debate, right? Okay, so I've already shown you how war preaches immorality within society, specifically in the international community. And I've shown you how that's very harmful in terms of progressivism, especially in the human rights like sort of way, okay, Mr. Speaker. Okay, Then we go to this idea of how war harms innocents directly and indirectly. We would say, Mr. Speaker, is that when war happens, it creates instability within a region, Mr. Speaker. Specifically, if we were to go with their unfair burden, which we don't know why they came up with, Mr. Speaker, we would go to like civil wars, okay? That's specifically in Africa, Mr. Speaker. We would say it creates instability in Africa in terms of like surrounding countries, Mr. Speaker. You have things like immigration, which hurt economic principles in terms of hurting the economics in global perspective. Because not only are you hurting that country itself, Mr. Speaker, you're hurting other countries in the process, right? You're hurting the country itself economically inside where its infrastructures blew up into little tiny pieces that you can't even put it back together anymore, right, Mr. Speaker? You're hurting another country as well, right? Who needs to feed these specific immigrants in today's debate. We think that's very important in today's debate, right, Mr. Speaker? We asked the question, name one country that has ever fully recovered from war, Mr. Speaker. And that was my opening line as well, and my opening rebuttal, okay? They need to do that. If we dare them and we challenge them to name one specific country that has ever like fully recovered from war, that doesn't have economic problems, right, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't have social problems, right, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't have NTC like what happened in Libya, political instability within the NTC. We think that's extremely harmful in today's debate. We think that war is continuous and war will forever be continuous. In that regard, we win.
May I start? To answer our last question we believe today that Germany, Japan and South Korea are just a few examples of countries which fully recovered after war. But let's begin from saying that today what team government didn't actually tackle is why wars really begin. They think that if a country does not simply attack, well, everything's good. And that is why we actually ask for an alternative, because we do not see why they say a country would risk would risk globalization, nuclear proliferation, and so on, and everything we said, which they completely ignore. We do not see why a country would simply take that risk just for war, because they didn't actually tell us why and what a country seeks in a war. And that is their burden today, to show us how, even though a war starts, then it brings more negative effects and it can be elsewhere solved. But starting with the first point, we believe that mainly, I'll bring you three main points today. First of all, about nowadays war and how are they different. Secondly, how easily does a war start, and here we'll analyze more about the culture of war versus war as the last resort. And thirdly, my own argument, and that being the need of war. But first of all, we believe that today, mainly internal problems and internal wars are to be discussed. And we actually refer to the most recent examples because they are the most relevant in this debate. We believe that if we bring this debate and we talk about wars most recently, this is exactly what we should do and what we would be best. Yes, please.
You would say that all your examples, specifically Germany and South Korea, didn't fully recover, right, from war. We would say when you think about Germany, there's a negative connotation. You think about the Schwarzsticker and what it did to societies. We think that's harmful.
Actually, we see it has a great economy and it's prosperous. And moving back to my point, we believe today that mainly, as we said, a UN study has confirmed us that more than 85% of the last wars were actually civil ones and created to bring down dictatorial regimes. For the one from Syria to Libya and to the Iraqi insurgency and so on. And that is why we believe today these are the main points we should talk about. And in these ones, war is actually a necessity. But I'll come back later and move on to, let's see how actually war starts. Because we believe today that, as we stated, there are a lot of things involved when a country decides to enter a war. So our question is, why didn't team government answer us Why did they only say, well, it forms a culture of war? And they actually didn't say us anything about globalization, about nuclear proliferation, about economic dependencies. Why do these do not count? Why does a country just enter and risk everything just for a simple war? And we'll tell you that the country generally gets in it when it's only a last resort, because nowadays the context has changed, and nowadays wars are actually a last resort in which we enter to solve some problems which we couldn't have solved by diplomacy or by negotiation. And let's talk about now at the third point, why are they needed? And here I'll tell you exactly the types of war and why in each of them we actually may not have any other solution. But first of all, we have civil wars. And here we ask you, dear judges, how could we as a country stay beside and ignore a civil war in which citizens are killed, in which citizens die and nobody can defend them but us? And that is the moment in which we believe an intervention is mostly necessary, and that is why we should declare war, and that is why we should intervene. As in the case of Libya, we believe that NATO, when intervened, and all the countries that intervened and helped Libya at that point, actually helped it, and so that the citizens were not in mass killed. Yes, please.
We like the fact that you used Libya, right? We think that Libya had political instability after NATO. It had economic instability after NATO. People died in Libya. Those are three harms to your one benefit. Speak to that.
We also believe that the no-fly zone the NATO made actually helped the citizen from being bombed. We believe that if the citizen and the cities would have been bombed, it would have been a lot worse. And that is why actually we need troops to intervene in countries which need us. Moreover, they actually ask us for help and ask for a war that would actually help them get out of their situation. And those are the moments we actually need to intervene. And not only this, but the internal protection as well. We believe that if a country has a very strong motives to believe it will be attacked, it should have the right to attack back so that it can protect its citizens. But before this,
if your aim is peace, right? I've already shown you how you don't achieve peace because you don't have collective agreement, because war perpetuates wars amongst countries. That doesn't mean you'll get peace.
Well, we believe that in the moment the war starts, the diplomatic relationships are not at their best at all. We believe that war actually is the single solution. We could solve these types of problems, and we believe that the diplomatic relationships may even get better after if we have a peace treaty that could prevent us from having the same problems again. Because these types of problems I have told you as civil wars do not have a solution by negotiation. We cannot go to the dictator and simply convince him to give up and save the citizen. We see that in this case we cannot do our duty, and so it goes in the internal protection as well. We believe that that in this case we have the right to strike back and so solve our problem, solve the problem of those citizens who are neglected. Not only this, but we have also the examples of war against terror, as in the cases of Mali and Rwanda. And these are cases in which terrorists actually went in these countries and occupied them. We see that we need wars in this situation. We see that we have no other alternative. We cannot negotiate with terrorists, and this is the main problem. There are a lot of cases in which negotiations fail, in which we have no other solutions, and in which problems are really big. And that is what we believe war as a last resort fixes. It fixes the tensions, the risk, the civil wars and the people dying. It actually helps people, and that is why we believe that after a war, a war starts with good reasons and it solves some problems. And even if it may bring harms on the economical matter, we believe the lives of the citizens we have saved are most precious. Thank you, and we beg you to vote.
We thank the lady for her speech, and we'd like to call up the first speaker of team proposition.
World War I, World War II, the Rwandan genocide, the Armenian genocide. These are all big wars, and side opposition has lazily chosen not to engage in these because they're too extreme. But even still, we've decided that as side proposition, we're going to play ball with them. We're going to let them have it their way in this case, and we'll break down the very little that they brought forth throughout my rebuttals. Moreover than that, I'll show you that how, as side proposition in this debate, we've actually shown you how war in actual fact does cause more harm than good, and we'll show you furthermore that in actual fact, side opposition in this debate hasn't necessarily fulfilled their job as what we would have expected from them to do, right, in order for them to win this debate. But before that, let's start off with a little bit of some basic information on what's happened in this debate. Side opposition came up here in the first speech and told us that they're going to be giving us principles about general wars, right? They're not going to be talking about the extreme wars, they're not going to be talking about the extremes, they're going to be talking about general good and bad wars. Specifically the good wars that have benefits and that have detriments, right? But the problem we have with this is that it doesn't exclude bad wars, right? It doesn't exclude the wars that led to mass detriment, ladies and gentlemen. It just means that they've left a whole huge part of this debate completely unattended to, ladies and gentlemen. And by virtue of them not rejecting the definition A, not rejecting our parameters B, ladies and gentlemen, all that shows is that there's a large gaping hole inside opposition's debate. Please tell me more.
So why don't you also talk about the 8 minutes war in the Sandwich Island?
The 8-minute war in the Sandwich Island? Before we can talk about the 8-minute war in the Sandwich Island, I'm going to assume not a lot of people were killed, right? I'm going to assume that it led to the freedom of the country, right? But why don't you talk about World War II, where not even 6 billion Jews were killed. That's just the Jewish people. What about every other race of people that were killed? What's that? About 11 million it adds up, ladies and gentlemen. Why don't you talk about World War I, where soldiers were killed with mustard gas, one of the most painful deaths a person could ever imagine? Why don't you talk about that before you ask me why I didn't talk about the 8-minute war in some small country that to this day is still unnoticed? We don't necessarily find that relevant to this debate. Let's go to your first point on the evolution of war. You basically told us that because of war in this modern day and age, it has evolved. It's gotten better. It's not necessarily that simple, right? So you basically said to us that wars must be necessary before they begin. You told us that people won't go to war with each other because of the mutually assured destruction theory that if I go to war with you, you'll destroy me, etc., specifically with nuclear bombs in this day and age. You told us that the detriments of war are deterrent enough to stop wars from happening. You've shown us that war is usually the last thing we do after diplomacy, and you basically said towards the end of your speech in that debate that soldiers choose to be soldiers, they choose to go to war. It's not necessarily anybody's fault except the soldier themselves. Now, all of this is entirely wrong, number one. Number two, all of this is not relevant to today's debate. So moreover, ladies and gentlemen, this point doesn't stand on two levels. Let's show you why it's wrong. Wars must begin because they're necessary. That's basically one of the things that they stressed, one of the things that they told us. But as my second speaker eloquently told you, there are wars that actually begin in this world unnecessarily, such as Congo and the M23, right? Such as that example, right? So we've seen that wars aren't always necessary when they begin. Some wars begin out of the blue, ladies and gentlemen. Some wars are sort of arbitrary because the actors act in arbitrarily, ladies and gentlemen, such as what NATO did in Libya. We don't necessarily find their involvement in Libya to have been completely necessary because we look at what it led to afterwards. They destroyed half the country and they gave them political instability. And what did that lead to in the end, ladies and gentlemen? Libya is now in a worse off state than it was before. Now take it. Let's go on with the mutually assured destruction theory. Ladies and gentlemen, this theory doesn't stand on one sole premise, ladies and gentlemen. We've noticed an example where not everybody really cares about mutually assured destruction. Dictators in this world don't necessarily care that they're going to die from the war as well. They just care about being manic and crazy. For example, we have North Korea posing threats to America, posing nuclear threats to America. We've seen them testing nuclear bombs with the perfect distance but in a different direction from North Korea to the White House, ladies and gentlemen. So obviously they're making threats to us. So this mutually assured destruction theory doesn't stand. Some countries simply don't care about your nuclear bombs. Now take it. So with that in mind, mutually assured destruction doesn't stand either. Let's see the detriments of war are a deterrent, right? We understand, ladies and gentlemen, people make the rational choice to join a war. They know there are detriments, and they still aren't deterred from this, ladies and gentlemen. Knowing the detriments of war in World War I, that didn't really stop it. Hitler knew that by engaging in the Jews as he did, it would lead to a world war. It would lead to America and all those other countries getting involved. That didn't really deter him either. What happened in every other situation, the detriments never are deterrent. Because as you said, it's the last resort. They think they've tried everything they can, so they just resort to war. But we've shown you how, in actual fact, either they haven't tried it properly, ladies and gentlemen, or whatever it may be. But this whole stance doesn't stand either, and I'll take it. And then let's go with diplomacy, ladies and gentlemen, which is something I was actually getting to right now in my previous sub-point under this. We've shown you how, in actual fact, diplomacy isn't always exercised correctly, isn't always exercised at all, such as DRC and M23, ladies and gentlemen. So in actual fact, we don't necessarily feel that all the proper steps before a war is engaged are followed. Why? Because, ladies and gentlemen, we don't think they follow the proper steps. They don't always opt for the best diplomacy. People give up easily and they decide to go in guns blazing. And we've emphasized and emphasized and emphasized again the detriments of this war, clearly proving that it brings more harm than good. So with that, their evolution of war point doesn't really stand, including the part where they say soldiers choose, because we all know you decide to be a soldier. Yes, you don't choose whether or not to fight the war. After you've signed up, you will follow your general, so that doesn't stand either. Evolution of war falls. Let's see the benefits they brought forth, not taken. Let's see the benefits they brought forth. They told us that war boosts economics, right? It boosts the economies of these countries, and that sooner or later in time, war brings peace. All right, let's analyze where this has actually happened, right, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of war boosting economies. War doesn't boost economies, ladies and gentlemen. The recovery after the war boosts economies. What does the war itself do and its immediate after effects? It trashes your economy. As my second speaker clearly told you, it puts your economy into shambles, ladies and gentlemen. It is not by virtue of the war that your economy booms. We don't think Hiroshima is in a good position right now. And even if they are in a good position, it's not because they got blown up in 1945. It's because they knew that they got blown up. It's because they knew their economy went into shambles, and thereafter they fixed it. So it is by virtue of the war that they even had to fix it in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. So war doesn't actually boost economies, it puts them in shambles. War doesn't bring peace either, ladies and gentlemen. We all inherently know that although there may seem to be no conflict between, for example, Germany and the Jewish people, ladies and gentlemen, but we all know there will always be that touch, that hint of subliminal underlying bad blood for what had happened during the Holocaust, ladies and gentlemen. So we didn't think war brings peace either, ladies and gentlemen. So with that in mind, their whole points on the evolution and all of that doesn't stand. Not taken, sir. And then the last point they tried to bring forth is the whole thing about internal wars and how they're good for freedom. But we don't necessarily think that innocent people dying is good for freedom, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, that's actually very bad. We don't like the idea of innocent people dying because they didn't sign up to be soldiers, ladies and gentlemen. And then basically, whatever else they brought forth in their second speaker speech was a small point that basically links back to all their side. So it's basically a hung speech. But what she did bring forth that was sort of different from her original speaker speech was her little point on the necessity of war and how we need war. Because people in the country are dying, and war is the best way forward. So we have to invade each other's sovereignty, and that there's a war on terror, ladies and gentlemen. So basically, let's get this straight, right? The problem is that people are dying. Is the fact that there's wrongs happening in a country. And your only solution to this side opposition is decide to go in guns blazing, which leads to what? More people dying. So what have you solved in this case, ladies and gentlemen? Nothing. You've only perpetuated the problem with war. So with us on side proposition, that actually concludes my rebuttals, and I've shown you how there hasn't been an opposition side. But on side proposition side of the debate, we've shown you how wars change international perceptions, ladies and gentlemen. It puts a stigma on certain people, and it actually puts a stigma on innocent people that never even took part, such as the Arabic people in America. They have the stigma from 9/11, such as the Germans and the Jewish people, right? We've shown you how it actually ruins economies with the duration of the war. We've shown you how it actually gives bad blood between countries, and we show you how war simply perpetuates war concepts. So war is bad, ladies and gentlemen. Peace, love, and lip gloss. We love everybody. Thank you.
May I start?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will prove to you once and for all why modern wars are beneficial. Let's see what today's motion was about. Well, today's motion states war causes more harm than benefits. That means that we have to live in the present. It is not caused, has caused, could cause. It is war causes these kind of things. That is why we should focus on modern wars, because war and because wars have evolved, because wars are not the way they were in 1949. So yeah, let's tackle that extreme wars thing for the last time. Extreme wars should not be in this debate, basically because this is not mathematics. We shouldn't just give 3 examples of extreme wars that were negative, 3 examples of extreme wars that were totally positive, and that's the end of the match. We cannot add like that. We cannot quantify through examples. We can only quantify through impact. And I will show you why modern wars, no thank you, why the general wars that we have to talk about, which are not the extreme ones, have only a positive impact. So my speech will be divided into 3 main points. First of all, what the modern wars that we are talking about are. 2, what their causes are and what this means for the match. And 3, the effects of the wars and why they are beneficial. So first things first, what modern wars are. We've stated and got absolutely no reply from the proposition team that 85% of modern wars are civil wars. That means that they are, for examples, countries from the Arab Spring, countries that are living under a dictatorship, that the people in those countries, just a second, are under human rights abuse. That's the wars we are talking about right now. Please, sir.
Okay, firstly, we think that we have shown you the harms of those wars that you're talking about. But secondly, we think that if you're going to argue that wars aren't existent in the modern day and age, then you can't argue that there actually benefits from those wars.
Of course, they do exist. That's what I was talking about. For examples, war to liberate Libya, wars to liberate Syria, wars to liberate the humans that were under repression. So let's go back to the modern wars. The modern wars are these ones, the civil wars, the wars against terrorism. We've got countless examples from Mali to Rwanda, and so on. What it all means is that the true question of this debate is, do these wars come with more harm or with more benefits in today's match? What do these wars impact? What's the impact of these wars, the modern wars? Do wars in this day and age cause more harm or more benefits? In order to see this, we need to look at the causes, and this will be the second point of my speech. The causes of these wars are, as I've said, human rights abuse, dictators, international tensions maybe. This is where the clash between the 2 teams' philosophies come in. They say that wars start because the culture of war that every nation has, while we tell you that that's not the case, and the war is the very last resort. And we are right on this matter for the simple fact that countries are way more interdependent than they were anytime in the past. The culture of war is just an assumption, is just a statement. The true fact is that countries cannot start wars by themselves because they want to. Not anymore, because they are interdependent, because destroying a country's economy will bring your economy down as well, because destroying a country's population will massively destroy your relationship with it, and so on and so forth. So basically, as the first speaker of the proposition actually approved with us in a POI, wars are truly the last resort. Other methods have proven to work, like diplomacy, like economical sanctions. But just a second. But when all these fail, we need another method, and that method is war. Sure.
The problem here is that, sure, war is your last resort. That doesn't make it any less harmful. That doesn't mean it has
That's
more
exactly why
harm,
the third point
which
of
is-
my speech will be the effect of these wars. But let's sum up where we've gotten this far in my speech. I've proven to you that we should talk about modern wars. I've proven to you that the causes of these modern wars cannot really be tackled the way they were in the past. We cannot really go full on guns blazing, as the proposition team names it, into other states. We need to take a different approach. And when everything else fails, well, yeah, war is the last resort. And this leads me to the effects of wars. And this is where the proposition side gets superficial, because what they say is that, well, as long as Libyan people died and the economy of Libya is on the ground, war was harmful. Well, that is entirely false. We shouldn't think about it like that. What we should think about it's that Libyan people were saved, it's that Libyan people were oppressed. Libya didn't have an economy. Libya was a dictatorship. Like many other countries in the Arab Spring, that war helped actually. What we should think about is that right now people are not bombed. Of course that people died during the war, but we have to see the bigger picture. Just a second. We have to see the bigger picture in which actually war saved people from that oppression. War gave Libya the opportunity to develop.
Tell us that the aim of Libya was to have democracy. We would say Libya doesn't have democracy, which means the aim of the war wasn't there because of the political instability within Libya with the election of the NTC after NATO went in.
Of course that Libya is right now unstable politically because it's a new country, it's a new democracy, like every single democracy was at its beginning, at its roots. But actually, UN troops are there. They are there to help them. Libyan democracy is getting better and better with every day. And what I'm trying to say here is that the proposition team didn't really show us any true harm with wars. All they've said is that, well, people die during wars, so wars are bad. Well, that's not the right way to think about it. The right way to think about it is that those wars, those necessary wars, as I've proven you, were beneficial because they saved people from further oppression. Maybe some of them died, but the true fact is that that the role of the war was fulfilled. And let's see what the true role of every single war is. Well, it's a treaty, because wars start and they end. Every single war ends at some time. They may take 8 minutes, they may take 4 years, but still wars end. And they always end with a treaty, with a peace treaty. And what that means is that the international relations after the war are really improved regarding to the way the international relations were before the war, because otherwise that treaty wouldn't have been signed in the first place. Every single war that finishes with a pact between the countries or in the country, as we have the Libya example, and that actually means that the role of the war, which was necessary, was fulfilled. And we think that because of those treaties, the political relations will actually improve, as we've seen after World War II. The international cooperation, as we've seen in the Arab Spring, proves that international cooperation is okay, and these relations are further helped. And last but not certainly the most important, human lives were saved. And because of all these things, I beg you to oppose. Thank you very much.
May I start? Okay. Mr. Speaker, all good battles of history have something in common. The fact that both the sides of the battle fight on the same battleground. And this happened in this debate because both sides agreed on the fact that per se we do not like war. But we win this debate in the moment in which we get a yes to the following two questions. Are wars necessary? And second, do they solve the majority of the problems that were before? Now, let's start with the first question. We believe that the role of the state, as we presented in our speeches, is to protect its citizens. That means that in the moment in which an internal or external problem appears, it is the duty, the fundamental and single duty of the state to protect its citizens. That means that in the majority of cases like civil wars, when a group, a terrorist group or something like this, attacks the rest of the people, it is the normal duty of the state to show that majority of the people that, well, we're there, that's what sovereignty is about, the fact that we're going to protect you. The same case applies when the human rights are infringed, because we're an international community, and in the moment in which the people want our help and beg for our help, it's our duty, as we have stated in all of our speeches, to help them. Now, the best example that sustained our case came on the side proposition. They talked about North Korea. Exactly. North Korea doesn't attack anyone because they're afraid of nuclear weapons, of the nuclear weapons of the USA. They're afraid of globalization. They're afraid that their economy will fall down. That's exactly what we stated in all of our speeches. The fact that wars have become the last resort. Even the nastiest countries like North Korea did not simply start wars because they're afraid. And this proves our point that wars exist only when they're necessary. This leads me to my second point about do they solve the problems? Of course, there are some things, negative things that appear. But let's look at the people that died. As we've stated, more people died in Afghanistan before the intervention. And that's a simple thing to understand, because modern wars are fought in a way that do not really kill the majority of innocent people. Oh, the people that die in wars are soldiers, and as I've stated in my speech, they didn't tackle is the fact that soldiers agree to go to fight wars. When they become soldiers, they know that sometimes they might fight in wars. Secondly, let's look at the tensions, because sometimes wars start because of political tensions. What happens when the war ends? Because all wars end. In the moment in which the war ends, a peace treaty appears. Now, this might be just a veil, as they presented, but this veil is provided by an international community, and you are afraid to destroy this veil. Maybe it's only about fear, but if fear is created by war to promote peace, and we both agree that we want peace, we do not see any problem in the fact that war finally brings peace. We believe that in the modern society, when the war ended, there was no country that reestablished a war position. No country did that because peace was kept, because peace is necessary, and people try to understand this after dictators disappear, after civil wars finish. Lastly, let's talk about economy. As we've stated, there are some economic problems, but like the case in Libya and other countries, as Horatio stated, there was no economy before the war. Now, they can develop economy. Let's have fiat money, let's have fractionary banking system. Today we can. We could not have them before. That's the fact that we provide you today. The fact that some things might be bad, we agree on that, but overwhelmingly, we have more benefits than disadvantages, and this is exactly our burden today. So at the end of the day, we've proven you three major things. The fact that we are talking about modern wars, that are civil wars and wars against terror. Secondly, that these wars are started as a last resort when they are necessary. And because they are started with rationality when they're necessary, that's why at the end of the day, we show you benefits. And at the end of the day, war solves more problems than it creates. Thank you.
This debate was supposed to be about whether or not war is good. It wasn't. We think they didn't fulfill their burden in today's debate. But let's really analyze what actually happened in today's debate, right? Even though they didn't fulfill their mandate, again. So the main clash that we have here is that the benefits of war outweigh any detriments themselves, right? That's the clash they brought up. That is what we tackled down in our speeches, okay? They tell you one benefit, right? Liberalization of individuals within society-specific autocratic regimes, okay? They tell you it's fine to blow up innocent people as long as you get that liberalization. Our response, we like liberalization, but we don't think that war is the mechanism to do it, right? We give you an example of Egypt, Algeria, and Liberia, okay, where they stepped in and negotiated instead of going to war, okay? We think that's substantive in today's debate. Second, we told you that the harms are more detrimental, okay? Things like political instability, specifically in Libya, right? With the National Transitional, the NTC, right? After NATO, right? We think that's important. We then told you specifically in my POI that democracy isn't really achieved by war, which is their main purpose, okay? Specifically in Libya, right? Which means that their main purpose wasn't really fulfilled by war anyway, because their only example was Libya on how successful war was, okay? So, and then we tell you that economic instability was actually something that was harmful. We showed you that infrastructure was very detrimental, right? We gave you another harm of morality in my speech, that women are raped, kids are blown up into little tiny pieces, and they end up being dead, right, Mr. Speaker? They had no response to any of our substantive matter, so that still stands. In fact, they tried to explain how it actually starts. We think that wasn't their burden, all right? Even if we were to claim that they were right in saying that war starts in that specific manner, that's not the debate here. The debate is about whether or not these specific individuals or war itself caters to more benefits than it does to harms. they failed to prove that burden in today's debate. They then retreat to saying that, well, other mechanisms don't work. Again, we tell you that that's not our burden to prove. We just needed to prove that there are more harms, and we did that, right? Okay, then we've also showed you how diplomacy and culture has gone. We gave you examples like the M23 in Congo, right? They failed to take out that example and that substantive matter down. So that point still stands in today's debate. We've won that. Okay, so we ask what country has ever been successfully recovered. They give you Libya. We said, no, that's not the case. Libya is so deep in trouble, it's not even funny. They give you Germany. We say, no, that connotation with Germany is a bad stigma, that you keep thinking of the Schwarzsticker, and that's harmful. Even perception is referred as reality within society, and that's actually what my first speaker was talking about. We think that's harmful as well, right, in today's debate. They had no response to that, okay? So they then tell you that, well, we didn't have any harms, right? We'll give you 7, Mr. Speaker, in today's debate. That's how many we gave you as to their one benefit. We gave you casualties, immorality, international relational harm. We gave you economic harm, political harm, and societal harm. How many more harms do they want in today's debate as to their one benefit that I've already shown you that we like liberalization. We think it's nice. We think we should have more of a liberalized society. But the fact of the matter is, does war actually achieve this? And will war actually help us in that regard? Okay. They then run to this last thing of saying, well, war's a last resort. We say our response to this was simple. Okay, that's fine. You still don't fulfill our mandate of proving to us how there is more benefits to war than there is than there are harms. They finally ran to people don't die in the modern world. We said, okay, what about Libya? People died there. What about the Arab Spring? People died there. No response. We win this debate on 7 premises as to their one. If they win, there will be more harms to debating society, right? 7 harms. Thank you.